The wise man who eats a small amount, which is appropriate for him, he doesn't indulge, and he eats food that's appropriate food, health-wise. He should eat it in the privacy of his home on his table. I mean, every word the Rambam writes is with a specific intention. The Rambam could have said he should only eat it at home. In the privacy, what does it say? Al shulchano, on his table. Understand? What's al shulchano? The table represents, it's the location where you eat. The people, sometimes you see where people behave in their homes. We once spoke about bedikas chometz, checking for the crumbs under the bed. First of all, what are crumbs done under the bed? Whoever heard eating in the bedroom? Well, when I go to bed, I take a bag of pretzels with me, and I crunch on the pretzels. It's not appropriate behavior. You want to eat at the table. The bedroom's for sleeping, or you want to read before you go to sleep, fine. What's this eating? So a chocham, not only does he eat in the privacy of his home, he eats al shulchano. He eats because that's when are you supposed to eat? We're speaking, he eats only when he's supposed to eat. Now, where does one eat? You eat at your table. Otherwise, if it's just the privacy of home, he eats elsewhere. Because he's not eating for the sake of eating. He's not eating to live. He's living to eat, to have that extra snack. But if he's a chocham, he doesn't do that. You should not eat in a store, meaning a store where the others are there. V'lo b'shuk, or in a marketplace, public setting, el beitzorach gadol, unless it's the utmost necessity. I'll give you an example. You're traveling, and you're in the airport, and you have to eat in the airport before you board the flight. You have no choice. If you don't eat now, you're not going to be eating for another 15 hours. So you have no choice, eat. But if you're eating in the airport, people see you eating. It's only because he has no choice. So he's behaving appropriately. This is appropriate behavior, because if he doesn't eat now, he's not going to be eating, and he has to eat. So therefore, it's not a contradiction to the way he should normally behave. I'll give you an example. The laws of modesty. The Jew has to be modest in his dress. So could you imagine, in New York City on the books, if you walk down the street with a man with the upper torso being exposed, you could be arrested for that. That's improper exposure. It's a law on the books. Years ago, if a person in the 50s walk bare-chested in the street, the Irish police would arrest him. Yeah. Today, it's inappropriate. But yet, as inappropriate as on the street, what about when you're taking a shower? And you have to undress to take a shower, or you're going into the shower room, in the room before you go in to undress. There's nothing inappropriate, because in that setting, that's appropriate. A wise man doesn't eat in a public setting. He eats in his residence on his table. Because that's where you eat. What about in a public setting where he has no choice but to eat there? It's no different than undressing, going into the shower. Because he has no choice. You have to eat. Being responsible, you have to eat. But I can't eat in privacy. So what is not to eat? What's the alternative? So it's a question of not eating or eating in a public setting. You eat in a public setting. That is a wise man's, that's an appropriate decision. It's inappropriate. No, it is appropriate. Why should you not eat in a public setting? Because you'll be seen, you'll be denigrated in the presence of others. Like I explained yesterday, it'll minimize your persona of being that special person. They'll see you as that chomping person, like the person who's guzzling a half-gallon cup of Coca-Cola. or a bottle of beer. People don't make discernments. The rabbi eats, they eat. It's all the same. That's why you should not eat in a public setting. You'll be seen negatively. You won't be appreciated for what you are. Now, this is very important. You should not eat together with people who are Amayoretz. Amayoretz are people, it's a certain quality of person. People are not learned. Because if they're not learned and they don't have the appropriate attributes intermeshed with Torah, when they see things, the reading is, they don't read the script right. Or to eat at a table with people who are gluttonous people. Shouldn't eat with those kinds of people. Now, why should you not eat with Amayoretz? Could an Amoretz, an ignoramus, a person who doesn't know what Torah is, but doesn't appreciate, could he appreciate what a person who's a Talmud Chacham? The Torah can't appreciate it. As a result of that, the way he understands the behavior of the Talmud Chacham, he doesn't understand it. His takeaway is not an appropriate takeaway. I'll give you an example. You know, the whole concept of an absent-minded professor, right? A person who's a true Torah sage, if you don't understand who he is, he's an absent-minded professor. All of a sudden, you're sitting with him, all of a sudden, he gets engrossed in thought. He's like absent-minded. He's out of touch with his surroundings. He's not absent-minded. That he's engrossed in thought is because that's his priority this moment. It's not he's not aware of what's around him. He chose to detach himself because at this moment, this is more important. It's not his mind is just blank. He's absent-minded. It's due to his immersion in what he is. But if you'd be sitting with a person who's not Moritz, a person doesn't appreciate what that is. The rabbi, he's an absent-minded professor. He's not sociable. He doesn't shoot the breeze with us. You know? The cop down the block, he's a nicer guy than the rabbi. Because he's not reading it right. I'll tell you a story. My Rosh Hashiva Zechariah Levarocha. My Rosh Hashiva, as a young boy, had always very bad eyes, very bad sight. So in Europe, the only people who had glasses, prescription lenses, you had to come from a wealthy family. Because, you know, you saw well, you didn't see well, so you look a little closer, you squint. My Rosh Hashiva's vision was so bad, without corrective lenses, he couldn't see. To that degree, even when he was a young teenager. So his parents, they had no choice. They had to get him prescription lenses. He was 14, 15 years old. He's walking down the street in Slobodka. That was a suburb of Kovna. And two burly Russians grab hold of him and they kidnap him. Why did they kidnap him? They kidnapped him for a ransom because they thought if he's wearing prescription lenses, he must come from a wealthy family. He's a candidate for ransom. And they told him, if they paid the ransom, we'll return you. If not, we're going to put you in a sack and throw you in the river. This is the story. So Rosh Hashiva, at the age of 15, he already finished Shas when he was 14 years old. And he had a special relationship with the chief rabbi of Kovna. And he said to these two Russians, you know, I have a rabbi who's like I'm a son to him, because his father already had passed away. And whatever ransom you ask of him, he will pay the ransom. But my Rosh Hashiva knew that in the home of the chief rabbi, there were always many people there, because they all came to discuss business issues. There were what we call cases had to be adjudicated. There was always minimally 50 people there. And the minute the Kovna Rav, the rabbi's name was Rabbi Shapiro, would see these two Russians holding on to this young teenager, as soon as he said, he would understand immediately what's going on, that he's under their control for ransom. So they go there and he convinced them that's where they're going to get the ransom payment. As soon as the rabbi sees them, he starts screaming. jump on these two people. There's such a tumult. These two Russians left him and ran away. That's how he saved his life. Otherwise, he would have been killed by these two Russians. So even at the age of 15, he didn't see well. He wore these lenses. Fast forward, Baltimore, 1935. Mar Shiva came to Baltimore, came to the United States in 1929, and he opened the yeshiva in 1933 in Baltimore. He started the yeshiva with 7 students. The majority of students came from Washington, D.C. The 7 students, one came from Cleveland, and eventually, and his wife was a very smart woman. His wife, her father was a Rosh Yeshiva in Slobodka. He was one of the leading Torah sages of the generation at the time. And his wife was a very astute woman, and she was responsible for the finances of the yeshiva. In those years, they had a ladies' auxiliary. What was the value of a ladies' auxiliary? Whatever the organization was, they raised the funds. They had the teas for the women, and they would have various events, fundraising. So she was involved raising money for the yeshiva, okay? And she would, and those people, they're very few observant Jews, but they were very traditional. You know, they all spoke Yiddish, and if they felt some level of attachment, they would support it, although they didn't fully appreciate what the cause was. So we called his wife the Rebbitzin, the wife of my Shiva. She was a very brilliant, smart woman, and she developed relationships in the community. And this woman, she says to her husband, I think you should give, in those years when money was money, you should give this is in the early 40s, you should give $500 to the yeshiva. Of course, it's really a worthy institution. I'm very close with his wife. She's a very impressive woman. And the way she speaks about her husband, he's one of a kind. As an educator, he should be you should get, so he gave $500. And they lived in the neighborhood where the yeshiva was. My Shiva walks down the street, passes this woman's husband, and he knew who he was. Doesn't say good morning to him, just passes him by. And the man thinks to himself, I gave $500 to the yeshiva. Don't you think I'm deserving of a good morning? Some level of acknowledgement. He was offended. Comes home, he says to his wife, he told me to give $500 for the yeshiva. I passed the rabbi, he doesn't even acknowledge me. No, maybe I shouldn't have given the money. So his wife gives him an argument. She says, you know why he didn't give you? Say, because you didn't give enough. You should give another 500. That's what his wife tells him. So he gives another 500. He's already given $1,000. Next morning, he walks by my yeshiva. Again, he doesn't acknowledge him. So after giving $1,000, the reason why it's not, it can't be because he didn't give enough. This is real serious money. So he comes home, says to his wife, I gave another 500, and he's aware of it. Maybe 2 or 3 days pass, he's aware he received the additional 500, and he still doesn't acknowledge me. So his wife says, I got to speak to the Rebbitzin to find out what's going on over here. Because the way she speaks to him, he's such a refined person and so appreciative, it's impossible that he shouldn't acknowledge you. She goes to him, and she says to him, you realize my husband doesn't see well. If you notice, he has very thick lenses. And besides having thick lenses, his mind is always immersed in Torah. And as a result of that, between his sight and his mind being fully immersed in Torah, he didn't even notice your husband. When he walked by, he did not notice your husband. Said, your husband shouldn't take it personally. He should not be offended. So you understand, a person who understands what a person of this status is, he'll give him the benefit of the doubt to the nth degree. But what about if you're an Amoritz? You have no background. How do you read the script? I give the man that kind of money. He doesn't notice me. Before passing judgment, why don't you go try to find out why he didn't notice you? That's why a Talmud Chacham should not eat with Amaratzim, even privacy home. If they're at your table, these kinds of people, they're not going to read the script right. The rabbi, he cut the meat with he cut the meat with his left hand, and he had the fork in his right hand. He doesn't have proper Eating etiquette. Yeah. That's already a basis for a classification. He doesn't have the book on etiquette. Right away, he what? He writes the rabbi off. No, the rabbi is today wearing more narrow ties. His tie is still one of those wide ties. They call them the bib. I mean, the old ties, they're wide. You don't even have to, you have to clean your shirt every whatever it is. You have to clean your tie, you don't have to clean your shirt. Yeah. So the whole processing of this individual, of this person, it's not. He should not eat in the presence of an Amoritz. Because it would reflect poorly on him because he doesn't appreciate what he is. It was known, Rav Chaim Brisker, Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, who was the genius of the generation. When he would become immersed in thought, it was known in Volozhin, which was the famous yeshiva which mentored the greatest Torah sages of the generation. He could stand in one spot without moving for 8 hours. 8 hours not to move an inch. You know, you read about the SEALs, the Navy SEALs. They could be in one spot, they're trained, that eventually you think they're part of the terrain. You could step on them, they will not move. Rav Chaim Brisker was immersed to the degree 8 hours straight. And he was like just still. Who ever heard of that level of concentration? You know, if you understand who he was, then you understand why he has elements of that. And why there was nothing he didn't understand. Because when he did that analysis, it was at the depth and breadth which we can't even relate to. So unless he's within the setting of peers or people who could appreciate him, he's not going to be appreciated. I'll give you an example. By ordinary people, you go to an Orthodox shul, and they ask this great Talmud Chacham, this great Torah scholar, could you please go to the Omud on Shabbos and be the Shliach Tzibur, be the Chazan? Man says, I'm not capable. Not capable. He doesn't have the voice. He doesn't have the ear for music. He's not capable. People say, this rabbi, he can't even do what our rabbi could do. I'm more impressed with my rabbi than this great Torah sage. He can't go to the Omud. You understand? That's a reading. The other person that gets the congregation excited, everybody sings in unison. And you sing Notre Dame at Nilo. You understand? That's their theme song. That's impressive. Rabbi has a sense of humor. This rabbi is so serious, he doesn't have a sense of humor. You understand? So they already categorized them. You take a poll among these kinds of people. I don't know if it's the North Pole or the South Pole, but they do a poll on it. I just want to show you I have a sense of humor to a degree. Okay. Person is a Nobel laureate. And you have a person from the most prestigious law firm writes a legal document. So they asked the Nobel laureate, could you please look at this legal document? Takes out his pinez, puts it on the tip of his nose with his fancy diction, and he starts reading the legal document. He says, this man wouldn't even be considered for a PhD in literature, the way he wrote this legal document. What does this Nobel laureate know about writing a legal document? It's not his area of expertise. His area of expertise, when you write prose, it's a whole different reality. Is he in a position to be able to evaluate what that document is? But if you're a lawyer and you understand what it is, you understand what goes into that document. That there wasn't a nuance of the issue that wasn't covered. It's as tight as a drum. That's how tightly that contract was written. Story goes back almost 39 years ago. This person comes to a share of mine. It was in Shai Gold's office. He wasn't observant, came from a conservative background. He was married a year. His wife was expecting. And when he came to the class on the Parsha, he liked what he heard. And he came a second time and a third time. Then he comes to me, he says, you know, My wife is expecting, and I like what you say. I'd like to bring my wife to you. We'd like to meet with you. Of course, we want to have a more traditional home because we're going to have a child. We want to raise him in a more traditional home. And we want to discuss with you how to upgrade and advance that we should have that kind of home to raise our child. So he comes with his wife, and his wife was so removed from Judaism, she never heard of the holiday Sukkot. Tell me you never heard of Tisha B'Av. Okay, Tisha B'Av. But Sukkot, it's one of the festivals. Never heard of Sukkot. Okay? So gradually, they started to take on certain things. And eventually they became Sabbath observers. Okay? That son, their oldest son, who was born at the time he was 3 years old. 3 years old. So I was living in Muncie at the time. We invited them to come for Shabbos. His wife, himself, and his child. Maybe he had a second child. He only has 3 children, 3 sons. And his son's at the table. And his son's a very precocious boy. We wash for the motzi Friday night. And he sees I have a salt dipper on the table. Salt dipper. And I take the challah, after I say the motzi, and I dip it into salt 3 times. 3 times. And then I distribute the bread to everybody on the table. So afterwards, the little boy noticed something. Why did I dip it one and I pour it on the bread? You have a salt shaker, you shake it. That's the first thing that touched this little boy. Secondly, he noticed I dipped it 3 times. If I want salt, then why is it enough to dip it once? If the reason why you're putting salt is that it should have the salt taste, once is enough. What do you have to do it 3 times? The child noticed that. And he made the comment to his father, Daddy, why? Why did the rabbi do that? So the father went and asked me why. And I gave him the reason why. So that was part of the learning lesson. This little child, 3 years old, noticed something. He asked his father. His father understands why he's there. It's because I brought him up to a certain point, but he still didn't know very much. And he's learning. He's open, and he feels I am a credible source for him to learn from. That's what I'm saying. Once you have credibility, and I have credibility with you, when you notice something, either you'll say, you understand what I'm doing, and if you don't, you'll ask why. And if you see something which is not appropriate in your eyes, you say, Rabbi, what seems to be, there's something wrong with what you did. So either I'll say, I admit I'm not perfect, nobody's perfect, or I'll explain why it was correct. Tell you a story. Years ago, we used to have lectures every other week at Yad Avram on 63rd Street. And we used to, I don't know if you ever came to those lectures, Larry. I'm not sure if you did. We had packed house. It was packed from front to the back wall, standing room only. And I had, the subject that I spoke about was the innate characteristic of chesed that every Jew has. That's an innate attribute every Jew has, because we all come from Avram Avinu. Hospitality. So after I really fleshed it out totally, what hachnosis orchim is, hosting a person in your home, how valuable it is. This man in the back gets up, must have been a person about 30 years old. So he says, this is the way he said it. So why aren't Orthodox Jews, why don't they do, or the religious, why don't they do hachnosis orchim? That's the way he said it. Hachnosis orchim. Hachnosis orchim means hospitality in Hebrew. Why don't they do it? Why do they have? If that's what they're supposed to, if they're religious, why don't they do it? Yeah. So from the way he pronounced the word hachnosis orchim, I knew it came from a religious background. Although he walked in without a kippah on his head, and he put it on when he came for the lecture. So I said to him, first I want to tell you, you're a liar. And you're a slanderer, because what you're saying is false and wrong. There's no more hospitable community than the observant community. The doors are open for any person to come in. So what you're saying is a lie. Okay, listen. He comes over to me after the lecture. There are 125 people, there may be more. He says, do you realize you embarrassed me publicly? Where do you have a right to embarrass me publicly? That's his claim against me. I said, I want to explain you something. You embarrassed yourself. I didn't embarrass you. You come from an Orthodox background. I understood from the way you pronounce those Hebrew words. A person who's a newcomer to Judaism doesn't pronounce Hebrew that way. So if you come from a background of that, how do you speak so irresponsibly in the presence of secular Jews, where they don't know what an Orthodox Jew, what a not Orthodox Jew? It's public slander. How do you do this? The only way I could respond is the way I responded. To nip it in the bud and discredit you, that it's a lie. So you embarrassed yourself. I didn't embarrass you. Speaking so irresponsibly, you embarrassed yourself. So if I wouldn't have explained it, you see, the rabbi embarrassed me. So publicly, I explained why I didn't embarrass him, but he embarrassed himself.